favorite DFS plays in the following price ranges on tonight's 11-game slate. So let's start in the $10,000 or higher department, Maddie.
I don't actually think anyone up here is underpriced necessarily, but there are a couple guys I like. And the one that jumps out to me in particular is Nikola Jokic. I think that most people are going to be aware of Jokic being suspended for one game because of what happened with the Heat. That's not really factoring into my decision here. It's more that I think that a lot of the popular value plays will be centers. We have Tony Bradley probably starting for Nikola Vucevic. We have Isaiah Stewart being really cheap. Jared Allen has been a really popular center play recently. So I think that people just aren't really going to get to Jokic. He's very expensive tonight. Maybe he is a little extra fired up because of what happened a couple games ago. But either way, I think that he's a good guy to pay up for.
Okay, who do you got to pay up for in this chunky price range, Kenny?
Hey, you want to talk about a guy that's going to be fired up? How about the guy that sat almost the entire fourth quarter as the second unit came back? And look, I don't know if he's necessarily going to be highly motivated here or extra motivated, but Julius Randle is going to have a lot of energy. Julius Randle's not a guy that gets to sit on the bench a lot. If you remember last year, one of the league leaders in minutes played, Tom Thibodeau loves to run him into the ground. Just 27 minutes last game because he sat on the bench while the second unit played and came back. So against the Milwaukee. So look, I think that Julius Randle here, he's fresh. That's something that you don't normally get to say about him. And he has a great matchup here against the Charlotte Hornets, who are third in pace and third to last in defensive efficiency. They're very, very weak inside. They don't rebound the basketball well. Miles Bridges and Mason Plumlee, just not known as big, imposing bodies. I think that the Knicks sort of bully the Hornets in the front court in this game, get back to playing that defense that we saw them play last year. And I think Julius Randle has a pretty big game. It's hard to knock taking Randle, considering he has a usage rate of 31% or more in 3 of his last 4 games. You know he's going to get the ball when he's on the floor. He should be on the floor quite a bit here. Should be well rested for a change. So fire him up at 10.2K.
Kenny, between 8K or 9K then? Who's your guy?
So this is a theme. I like pace and I like bad defense. I think everyone who plays DFS likes that, right? And Damian Lillard at $9,800 has that here against the Rockets, who are second in pace and 19th in defensive efficiency rating. In 5 of the last 6 games, he's had 43 DraftKings fantasy points. He's been one of the most consistent players ever since his terrible start shooting the basketball. I think that his consistency mixed with his matchup is going to make him a very popular play. So I might kind of steer away from him in GPPs. But if I'm playing a cash game, I really like firing up Damian Lillard. I just think he's a very good play. Maybe not the highest ceiling play on the slate, but certainly has a pretty high floor here and should definitely still hit value even at $9,800 with this matchup. I really, really like it.
Matt, what do you do here between the $8,000 and $9,000 department?
So Nikola Vucevic is going to be out for the Bulls, and the Bulls' 2 leading scorers now are DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. Both of them are priced between 8 and 9K. I think LaVine is probably going to be a little bit of the more popular option. I think both guys are good choices, though. I'm leaning towards DeRozan. It's mostly just that I think that he's more similar in what he does to LaVine. He scores more on the inside. LaVine is more of a perimeter player. And the opportunity is going to be there for both of them. The Bulls are just missing a lot of usage with Vucevic not being in the lineup. Tony Bradley is not much of an offensive player. He could be someone to save salary with, but the Bulls are going to need scoring elsewhere. And I think DeRozan and LaVine pick up the slack. Both are good options, and I'm just leaning slightly towards DeRozan.
Okay, we're heading south even more. 6K or 9K, Maddie?
So we're waiting for news here, but Tyrese Halliburton missed the last game that the Kings played. They were not good in San Antonio against the Spurs, but they have another good matchup. The Spurs defense was lacking without Jakob Poeltl. Didn't matter. The Kings were still pretty bad. But now they're playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, chance to bounce back. And I think Buddy Hield in the mid-range is someone that no one's going to be thinking about. He just hasn't been very good lately, hasn't really been good this season. But because of the way he plays, where he just is launching threes all the time, there is upside for him. So assuming Halliburton's out, I think Hield is actually one of the better plays in the mid-range. And especially if that news comes after lock, I think the ownership is going to be really, really low on him too. So I kind of like this whole Sacramento side. If guys like Halliburton and then even Terrence Davis are out, just opens up a lot of minutes for everyone. We actually saw Hield start last game. He's started a couple times when Halliburton hasn't played this year. So I think we get that opportunity again. Hield is a pretty good play.
Kenny, price check for me in the salary range, please.
Yeah, I'm going to go with John Collins at $7,100. Look, you look at the last 8 games, he's had a floor of 30 minutes, and now no DeAndre Hunter, no Bogdan Bogdanovic, or potentially anyway, no Bogdan Bogdanovic or DeAndre Hunter. I think that could definitely open things up for Collins if one or both of them sit. 35 minutes last game. I know that the Nuggets are not the best matchup. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league. But I think that both these teams should be in for an absolute battle. Matt mentioned that, Nikola Jokic maybe comes out fired up here. I think the Hawks have something to say on offense. And I also don't think that many people are going to just run after John Collins here, considering he's had 2 bad games in a row. They came against Utah and Golden State, 2 very good defenses. And I know you're not really getting like an upgrade here with Denver, but I do think that John Collins is a very talented offensive player, and he probably garners more usage than the low usage rates he's seen over the last, I would say, 10 or so games if both these guys sit. So I'm waiting on the injury news, but I think $7,100 is a really good price to pay for a guy that could easily get you 30 or 40 fantasy points if the scenario is right with his minutes.
The pride of Cardinal Newman High School, John Collins, Kenny Ducey. Under 6K, dude.
Yeah.
Save us some cash. Find us some value, Kenny.
Frank Kaminsky, $5,500. There's no DeAndre Ayton, or he's doubtful, so we're expecting no DeAndre Ayton for this game. 46.8 DraftKings fantasy points his last time out. He played 31 minutes. We know he can shoot the ball. The matchup is not the best with the Grizzlies, but it's also not the worst. They're kind of a middling defense. So I think that Frank Kaminsky is a pretty solid play, and he's going to be a pretty popular play as well from a value perspective if there's no DeAndre Ayton as expected.
All right, Matty, how about you, dude?
So a couple of news situations. Kenny actually mentioned the Hawks with Bogdanovic and DeAndre Hunter, both questionable. They both didn't play last game. And Kevin Huerter, who's still only 4K, was really, really good. I think he got to 42 fantasy points. So he would be a really appealing option, especially if Bogdanovic doesn't play. You have Cam Reddish there. So I think those are the guys to save salary with in the Hawks situation. And then just one other situation to mention. If Draymond Green doesn't play, he missed most of the second half last game. I think it was with a leg injury. You have guys like Otto Porter Jr., Nemanja Bjelica, who are both in the $3,500, $4,000 range. So any of those guys, depending how the news breaks, I think could be pretty appealing.
All right, Slate Approved pick time. Favorite DK Sportsbook bet, Matt?
So an hour ago, the Minnesota Timberwolves were plus 3.5 against the Lakers. That line is only 2 now. I still kind of like it. I mean, this can maybe just be for future reference for people. I'm very anti-Lakers right now. I didn't think they were good with LeBron, and they certainly aren't a good team without him. So maybe just if you're going to bet against the Lakers, you have to get in earlier. One other game I'm looking at is if Brandon Ingram returns for the Pelicans. I think that he does enough to make them at least a competent team. They've really struggled this year. Even without him, I feel like they should be better than what they've been. They just lost at home to the Thunder, but I think they turn it around at some point. This team does have some talent, but especially if Ingram comes back. They're getting 9 points at home against the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, they still don't have Kyrie Irving. I think the Nets are good, but that's a little too much respect for them if Ingram plays, so that's a situation to keep an eye on also.
Kenny.
You know what I'm going to do here, right? I'm going to take the Knicks money line at minus 125, but I think I have pretty good reason to do it. I think that the Knicks, they haven't really been healthy in the front court, and Nerlens Noel and Mitchell Robinson have sort of alternated games where they've played. I think that tonight probably is the night where both do indeed play, which should give Taj Gibson a much-needed rest here. Taj Gibson is, a great guy to put in there for 10 or 15 minutes. He's not going to lead your front court defense. I think that the Knicks here, with a solid front court, should bully the Hornets, who are very weak in that area. Cody Zeller, not a very good rebounder. I think that if they can take control of the front court, they can defend inside, and they can ultimately get some extra possessions for their offense, which has been very, very good. And I think that they can win this game against the Hornets. It should be a very fun game. I also really do like the Timberwolves, like Matt. Hate the Lakers. H-A-T-E, hate the Lakers. They're terrible. And they probably lose this game against the Timberwolves. I'll probably take them on the money line, to be honest, Minnesota.